Welcome to Baltic World. I'm Charlene.
I'm Crispin.
And this is our Week in Review. Baltic World is a premier channel where we discuss important issues facing Northern, Central and Eastern Europe. Before we begin, how are you, Crispin?
Mostly good. I went away camping with friends, got to play with the drone a lot, crashed the drone for the first time, but it still survived, thankfully. And it's a beautiful country. I live in here, Australia. The weather's starting to warm up for summer, so people are getting quite excited. Unfortunately, the border restrictions are still incredibly strict. We were planning to do some interviews in other parts of the country with various bits of the Baltic community. And we look like we're going to have to postpone that, unfortunately, for a few months. But we've got a lot of plans in that regard. So traveling around Australia, introducing you to some of the Baltic scenes that are here. Certainly going back to the Baltic countries, and also some viewers from other parts of the expat community around the world. I got people reached out to us from Chicago, where there's a huge Lithuania community. There's a massive Lithuania center there, which I hadn't heard of. So that's, fantastic. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Other than that, I think life is going pretty good. How about you?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's kind of interesting of just in Australia, we've had very little COVID cases these past couple of years, right? We've enjoyed our freedoms. But then as the world is opening up, we're still closed. Because it's kind of like a weird balance between do we introduce more cases or do we not? And we're just not used to that. Whereas I think other countries are more comfortable with having lots of cases, but then also very high vaccination rates. So yeah, it's a bit, but overall been well, just working while you were traveling. I was working and I have a language app that I've been working on. So yeah, La Batiana.
Labas.
So it's when Zveke. So every day on the train when I go to work, I normally practice my Chinese on a language app. Got free from the library. And then I was like, surely it has Lithuanian on here. So I looked at it and I was like, oh, it does. Now, I need you guys to help me and find out if this is actually authentic or not, or if I'm just learning something completely
Yeah, we got told that the robot with now speaking Lithuanian names video was terrible, and because it was just a wonderfully useful website, we thought, because we had the word in Lithuanian, it had the kind of phonetic spelling, and then it had the audio. So we assumed that this was all good if people took the time to actually create this.
Yeah.
But apparently not. Terrible. So we'll have to learn Lithuanian through, native language speakers.
Yeah, proper speakers. But, and before we can go travel and all that. So let me just play one word and just see.
Labadiana.
Please tell me if that's authentic or not. But that's everything. But as you were away, we've got some comments. They're coming in thick and fast. And a lot of people are asking about Patreon, Crispin.
Yeah, I mean, as we said before, thank you very much for putting that forward. We were going to wait till about 2,000 subscribers because, as we said before, we want to have special things to offer Patreon supporters. However, we are going to bring it forward for those people that wish to support us, and absolutely, we haven't done it before, so we don't have any real guidance. We'll just leave the links down below. We haven't even set it up yet. We'll do it after this video. At the moment, the current thinking is that once we have a certain number of Patreon subscribers, and this is hypotheticals, we haven't settled.
Yeah.
But once we have a certain number of Patreon subscribers, we'll make special videos just for the Patreon supporters, for those people that want us to create a video on a particular topic. So we'll create a video just for them. They'll get that video first, and then we'll potentially release it to the broader channel. If it's too edgy, if it really brushes the YouTube community guidelines, if it's a very controversial topic, we might publish it in other ways, but that's the kind of reward we would like to give people who do support the channel. And supporting the channel really would help us turn this into a proper media institution where we can create video content every single day. That's the kind of goal, perhaps even multiple videos a day on issues affecting everywhere from, Estonia to Poland. To have people, who are native speakers kind of working with us to help translate content and all those sorts of things that we would like to see grow. So, supporting the channel will be an investment in the actual content. Thanks for everyone who suggested it so far. So, but please, this is COVID times. People don't have a lot of money. Don't feel obliged. This is, we'll continue to create content for free. We love doing it. We are absolutely committed to the growth of this channel. So if you want to support us, please feel, we will be very grateful. But if you don't feel in a position to do that, then don't worry about it, please.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to open it up and pose a question for those who do want to support us via Patreon. What do you want to see? Is it because, you don't mind shouting us a coffee, or is it more like, oh, I actually want to be able to Q&A or more tailored videos, like you said? So I'm just putting that question out there. Drop it in the comments below, and we'll take note. So there's that. What's another admin thing we had to do?
We're introducing a new series, a book club. It'll be a monthly review of a piece of literature originating from this region of the world. So Baltic region, Central Europe, Northern Europe. We're starting with The Witcher. Most of you will be aware of the Witcher video games. They are excellent. I've only played Witcher 3, but I really enjoyed it.
I think I watched a few episodes from Netflix.
Yes, and the Netflix series. They're Henry Cavill as The Witcher. Very interesting kind of style, this sort of non-linear, non-chronology sort of way. It did come together at the end, so I thought that was quite promising. I know season 2 is out very soon, so we thought this would be great. And I've been reading The Witcher, picked it up as part of this series. I knew we were going to do this, and I've been really enjoying it so far. I can totally see why it has become such a cult phenomenon, and how it's one of those things that would have been quite sort of isolated and insular originally, and then it sort of burst onto the mainstream. Really, the sort of Slavic literature style really comes through in reading it. So I've greatly enjoyed it. We'll just be reviewing the first book, which is a series of short stories, and then I'm sure later on, a future point in the series, we'll get into the novels proper. Looking forward to talking about it, because there is much to discuss. I think it had really come through in terms of different aspects of humanity and a very Slavic worldview. So I'm looking forward to discussing with you guys.
Yeah. I started reading chapter 1, and I had to stop and start Googling because I don't really have much of a Slavic historical knowledge.
Yes. I mean, Charlene's a bit kind of hamstrung because The Witcher assumes a kind of understanding of both the fantasy Tolkien-esque side of world, as well as medieval times from that period. That's a very difficult thing for a layperson to just kind of come across, but it's still once you get those terms, then the literature becomes quite engaging and very worthwhile.
Yeah, so tune in for that. And this week, right, I'm going to jump straight into this week. Belarus is dumping more migrants on the border. I thought the wall was fixing that problem, but obviously not, because there's a state of emergency been announced by the Lithuanian government.
Yeah, there's a lot in that.
And what is his main objectives? Just to remove the sanctions, or just to show the gaps in the EU?
All of the above. I mean, in the video, I talked about how Erdogan got paid off. So he got millions of migrants within Turkey looking to get into the European Union. And he said, look, if you don't give me what I want, I'm just going to let them cross over. And the EU decided that they would pay him off. And this, I think, taught Lukashenko that there is a vulnerability in terms of the EU borders, because it's not, the EU is sort of a half-pregnant country, right? It's made up of constituent states that have their own national identities and their own views, and those views are different across the continent. And so by flooding the EU with migrants, it creates discord within the European Union. It's not clear how many more people the European Union can actually absorb. And it's not clear what the response to Lukashenko can be. If you've already imposed a ton of sanctions on his regime, then he doesn't have much more to lose. Okay.
Sure.
So he's clearly doing this to accentuate the fissures that exist within the European Union. This really advantages everyone who's anti-EU, including Russia, and also hoping to get some of the sanctions relieved in exchange for dealing with the border issue. I don't think he's going to be successful in that. I think it's going to be well, because I think it's hardening resolve among the Western countries to securitize the border. It may have an effect long term. Okay, so if we think about Australia and our kind of migrant debate, for those that don't know, Australia has basically the strictest border control on planet Earth. If you arrive in Australia by boat, as a migrant, you're shipped off to the middle of the Pacific Ocean on facilities that we've put out there, and you stay there forever until such time as you get basically go home or you get your claims assessed, and another country, not Australia, takes you. So Australia has a large migrant intake of refugees, but we do it through the UNHCR. So we'll take 30,000 a year, something like that, some big decent number. And we go to various camps around the world and we'll collect the refugees and bring them to Australia. Okay.
Yeah.
But what we don't allow is people to self-select by going from the Middle East, through 20 safe countries, coming to Indonesia, getting on a boat, and then coming to Australia.
Yeah. We don't want to encourage human trafficking.
We don't want to encourage human trafficking. We had a terrible incident in where a boat went down on Christmas Island, near a cliff face, and 50 people drowned. It was all caught on camera. There was nothing anyone could do. It was in the middle of a massive storm. And then that's just the people that we see, not the people that we never hear from. So that's one of the reasons. There's a humanitarian aspect to it, but there's also just a border control aspect to it. When, Australia being such a wealthy country on the edge of Asia, it's a very attractive place for people in our, the northern countries to come to. And so if we don't have strict border control, we very quickly get overwhelmed. I mean, we saw that with Kevin Rudd when he dismantled the sort of border control system, and we went from 700 a year to 50,000 a month, something crazy. So we need those strict borders, like it or not, to be able to do it. But what it does is it stops people from making the journey in the first place. It allows us to have a regular refugee program. We're still taking large numbers of people, but just through proper processes. But it is a very severe approach to border control. If someone gets on a boat and comes to Australia, they never, ever get settlement here. They're sent to the Pacific, where they're looked after and they're housed and they're protected and everything. If they're fleeing persecution, they're safe. But they don't get to settle here. Another country has to take them, and it goes through the UN process. So it's a very, restrictive process. Now, if the EU, with Poland and Lithuania and Latvia, do things the same way, if they say, look, everyone that's in our border who has come from Belarus cannot settle in our countries, they either get taken by another EU country or they live there forever. Well, on a long enough timescale, that's really going to churn the stomach of a lot of people in the EU. There'll be different political parties who, have a more quote unquote humane approach. They want to be more welcoming of refugees. And so they're going to be much more sympathetic to people who are kind of stranded, in this sort of no man's land. Now, the problem with the people on the Belarusian side of the border is not only is the border being securitized, but the people being dumped there by Lukashenko aren't even allowed back to Minsk, right? So what's happening is...
So where are they going?
They're stuck there. So they're getting flown in to Minsk.
Yeah.
The Lukashenko regime is then bussing them out to the border to try and get them across into the EU.
Yeah.
And dumping them there. So if they don't get into the EU, well, they can't get back to Minsk.
But they're in Belarus.
Yes. So there is about 5,000 currently in Lithuania. I'm sure, several thousand in Poland. And then the border has now been securitized. There's, hundreds of border control guards, police, soldiers. introducing new kind of satellites and detection tools and drones and things like that. And they've created a state of emergency in Lithuania.
Yeah.
So it's going to be much more difficult for people to cross the border. And now they're building the wall. So what we have is an increasing number of people who are on the Belarusian side. And either Lukashenko will stop bringing people into Belarus because he realizes that there's all these people on his border that he can't get rid of, or it creates such discord within the European Union that it starts to fracture the European Union and solidarity. And one of the comments really laid that out well, saying that there are various people across the European continent are saying, why are we worrying about this at all? We should be welcoming them in if they're fleeing persecution or whatever. It doesn't matter how they get here. And then they're like, and then other people saying we can't just have people floundering on the border. This is inhumane. It's not, supporting human rights and so forth. And this is something Lukashenko can exploit with glee. So this has become a test of resolve. And the people caught in the middle are these people who, increasingly desperate, will become increasingly violent. And that's one of the reasons you need the state of emergency. You need to be able to control the situation without it becoming a propaganda video, worldwide. You need to be able to kind of control the space, if you like, in order to find a resolution. And that doesn't mean to say that it has to be not, that it has to be inhumane. When John Howard, the Australian Prime Minister, introduced offshore processing and made things really restrictive, he did compromise, but he did it quietly. He did it outside the public eye. He did it outside the media space, not to encourage anybody else to take advantage of that. So sometimes it's helpful from a humane point of view not to let things be run through the media, because that really hardens resolve on both sides. If someone says, look, we can't let these people through because that's going to encourage 100,000 more.
Sure.
Okay. Well, that might well be true. But if you do have a strong border and you do have all the security, and everyone knows that's the case and people stop coming, well, the people that are already there, you can say, look, we can do something about these people, So there are things you kind of want to be able to handle things quietly.
Okay, sure.
But who knows where this is going to go? I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I don't think this is just the one thing that Lukashenko is doing. I think there's a bunch of other things that Lukashenko is likely to be doing to exploit the fissures that exist in the EU. This human crisis, this border control crisis, is just one of those things.
I would have thought strengthening the border would have been enough deterrence for people to, think like there's no point of trying to cross this border. But I mean,
there's a lot to be said there. Like, is it? We don't know about the level of information that the people have. Like, they might be told, look, we'll fly you into Europe.
Like,
and then you just go across the border.
From Germany and all that kind of, they could be plastering that all over. True.
So that's one issue. There's, pressure from the countries that they're going from. So a lot of them are being flown in from Turkey. Turkey might not give them a choice. They're like, you're getting on this plane, off you go. And then, if they do cross into the EU, well, there's a lot of opportunity, right? Because, like, for example, thousands of people on the Lithuanian side of the border, they're the ones that are creating the real problem for the EU right now, because the Lithuanians clearly don't want to have them in Lithuania, understandably so. And other countries in the European Union are reluctant to take them. So then that becomes an internal problem for the EU. It's one thing to kind of push people across the border, make sure that they can't cross in the first place.
Yeah.
People can kind of get that. But once they're in the EU, they're subject to EU law. Yeah. And that becomes a very vexing issue when there's a sense of unfairness between the EU states.
Sure. Yeah, right. Belarus is being such a bully. It's so annoying these small countries are on their border. Like, if it was like France or like, Germany, something like a lot bigger that has the capacity to handle this.
Yeah, I mean, it's
really, I don't know.
Go on.
I think it just relies on true leadership within the EU, right? Like, I'm sure it stirred up some discussion between other countries that, can process migrants, like, and understand. Yeah.
it's a true test of the EU. The EU needs to express great solidarity with these countries in order to resist this aggression. Lukashenko, I mean, Belarus is a poor country, okay, but it has over 10 million people. Has more people in Belarus than the three Baltic states combined, basically. So it's a decent size, and the Lukashenko regime is the last kind of true dictatorship in Europe outside of the Vatican. Okay, it doesn't have much to lose, so it's clear that they will continue to put pressure on the eastern border as much as possible, and this is a big advantage to Russia, which has always hated the fact that NATO has expanded to the Russian border and seeks to destabilize this region as much as possible. We've seen a massing of troops in Yelnya, which is east of Belarus within Russia. Not clear what they're doing there. I know that the Americans are increasingly concerned. Biden made a comment about that today. So it's who knows where this is going to go. It's definitely going to get worse before it gets better. I don't think Lukashenko has much incentive to stop because it's one thing to... there's really two forms of deterrence. There's deterrence by punishment and there's deterrence by denial. So robbing a bank, for example, I know this seems like a jump, but this is pretty much how it plays out here. Robbing a bank, if you go into a bank and you are known to, you're going to get caught, right? You walk out with the money, but highly likely that you're going to get found and arrested and sentenced to jail for a long time. Well, that's a deterrent, right? If you go, okay, well, I could do this, but I'm probably not going to get away with it.
Yeah.
So people don't do it for that reason. The other thing that can happen is you walk in, they press a button, the security things go up, and you can't get the money anyway. Right? So that's deterrence by denial. So at the moment, the EU's option is really deterrence by denial, i.e., by securitizing the border and preventing people from crossing into the European Union.
Sure.
Then a larger number of people are then stuck on the Belarusian side of the border. That becomes a problem for Lukashenko long term.
Right.
And so if that persists, Lukashenko may decide to say, look, it's not worth it. This is a failure. Berlin airlift is a really great example of this. Stalin blockaded the Western Berlin, wanted to make sure that no one could get from, because Berlin located in the Soviet-controlled area, that the Western Allies were not able to open land routes to supply the Western Berlin thing, trying to force the Western Allies out. And then that created the Berlin airlift, like many planes flying in every day, every half hour to supply West Berlin. And eventually Stalin was like, damn, it's not going to work because the Western Allies have kept the air corridor going to supply West Berlin. And he eventually had to admit it was a failure, one of the greatest logistical exercises of all time. And that was a deterrence by denial. Like he tried to blockade Berlin. It didn't work. He had to admit failure. Lukashenko is trying to flood the EU with migrants. The border's being securitized. It may not work. The problem is it's not being combined with deterrence by punishment because there's already a large number of sanctions on the Lukashenko regime. So he has incentive to keep this up until he can't afford to do it anymore. Okay?
Yeah. So he's kind of forcing a negotiation.
That's what he's hoping to do. So this is a real test of EU resolve. It's like, okay...
Sure.
How much human misery on this border can you stomach, right? Because the problem the EU has is that certainly Lukashenko can handle more human misery than the EU. Okay, Lukashenko does not care about these people, right? So if they starve and die and resort to cannibalism and you see like the worst of the worst things happen, then Lukashenko's not going to care, right? But the EU absolutely will care.
Yes.
So that's what Lukashenko is banking on. However, if you give in to his demands, then this problem will never stop.
No, he'll just do it again.
And if he can be convinced that the EU, no matter what, won't let up, then things will stop before they get to that point, right? Because Lukashenko will be like, I can't afford to keep bringing people in here. I've got to do something with them myself. This is becoming a problem for me. Clearly, this is a failure. Let's just stop it, okay? And he'll try and get some concession to do that. So he'll be like, look, I'm not going to get everything I want, but I want these sanctions removed. okay? And the EU might find it difficult to say no. If they go, okay, this problem will go away if we just give a couple of token sanctions that we don't really care about for a country that's quite small, that's going to be a tough call. So this is a real test going forward, and I wouldn't underestimate it.
I'm so glad I don't live under a dictator that just like, who cares about these people on the border?
Don't we?
Oh, sorry?
Don't we?
What do you mean?
Well, our government is not letting us travel. We've basically been rejected internal travel between capital cities because of we were going to go to Canberra, and there was like 10 new cases today in that city, and so we've been rejected travel. So I feel a bit, let's say, restricted. I was gonna be even.
Don't make direct comparisons. There's no comparison here. Cancelled. Another video we released this week was about the Holocaust. And it was a tough video. I don't know about you. Actually, let's go through it. You kind of outlined in the video of why you were motivated to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Well, how do you feel, I guess, like creating such a video?
It was definitely the scariest video that we've ever done because on the one hand, we want to give our honest views, but we don't want to make anyone feel unnecessarily bad, because I do believe a lot of positive things are happening. And it's this balance, right, between, doing justice to victims and acknowledging the weightiness of the subject matter, but exploring its many nuances and controversies and difficulties. And because everything is so binary in a sort of online space, nuance can be taken out of it completely. And to that extent, I would like to extend my thanks to the viewers who have largely given very thoughtful comments, even when they disagreed and even when they had their own points of view. The one thing I would kind of address, there's two things I'd say. The first is some Lithuanians have, not all, some have this kind of persecution jealousy, is how I would describe it. They fear the attention that is given to the Holocaust because they see it as overshadowing their own suffering. Remember that they were occupied by the Soviet Union. They then had decades of occupation where many atrocities were committed. And as we go forward in the History of Lithuania series, having done the Holocaust video, we can focus on those issues much more strongly, which are, under-researched and not spoken about sufficiently in the common parlance. Yeah. And there is one thing that I do agree with here. I don't know. I mean, there's some things I disagree with. There's one thing I do agree with, which is that we are far more permissive of communism than we are of fascism in our discourse, right? If someone starts talking about racial supremacy or hatred of a particular group, we can kind of take that person out of the equation and say, look, they're clearly, have a disturbed ideology, right? Yeah. But people can talk about class warfare, dividing people up into immutable characteristics, sort of saying that there's two classes of people, victims and oppressors. And we're seeing this with increasingly disturbing frequency in the West. Right? And we won't go into it here, but there isn't the same visceral concern about the destruction that communism has wrought all across the world as compared with fascism, which is considered, universally reviled, right? So the Lithuanians and the Poles and other Baltic countries and those that have experienced occupation under the Soviet Union know what communism truly is because they lived and breathed it. They understand the consequences of this ideology. And so being concerned and saying, look, why is there all this focus on this one thing when there are equivalent levels of massacres and harm and devastation? Why aren't we feeling the same way about this. And that's a legitimate complaint because communism is sympathetic in the West, and I don't understand why. But that said, it doesn't. That's a cultural issue. It's different to history. Okay, like when we're talking history, we're talking about truth. We're talking about facts, and we want to understand the narrative and why things happened the way they did. So, just because there are other atrocities that happened, and I'm talking about the Holocaust in this video, you shouldn't draw that comparison. It's not like for like, right? You're not going, oh, if we're focusing on the Holocaust, we can't also talk about the atrocities of the Soviet Union. Okay, what we need to do is just talk about the atrocities of the Soviet Union as well as the Holocaust, and not see them as taking away from each other. There shouldn't be a victimhood Olympics, right? When people are feeling resentful that, the Jews, so-called, are getting all of the attention when the people of Eastern Europe are not, that's not like a healthy way psychologically to deal with it. That's not the problem. The problem is just that we're not talking about communism enough, right? The other thing I was going to say about this is people should not be talking about, particularly in the context of Lithuania, talking about the Jews, the Litvaks, as different to the Lithuanians, okay? For hundreds of years, the Jews were living side by side with all the other Lithuanians, right? They were going to the same schools, the same professions. When I was reading the diaries, and I was thinking about reading out some of these stories in the video, but it was just too upsetting, right? But when I was reading out the diaries, it was like there are people talking about, there was this kid who went and stumbled over a killing field and found all his teachers, right? Like he was a normal Lithuanian, his teachers were Jewish. And he had no concept of understanding the difference, right? And no one ever talked about it because being Jewish or being Lithuanian, they intermarried. There was no, this separation became artificial.
Yeah.
And then some people were saying, but there's an issue with Jews and the communists, right? And this is where we get into real difficulty. It is certainly true that some Jews, as with many non-Jews, were communists, right? But who were the communists in that time? They were the inner city intelligentsia. If we think of like the inner city elites that happen in New York or Los Angeles and stuff today, think of the inner city intelligentsia of like 1918, 1920s and so on, thinking about the hyperinflation in Germany, the continued problems of imperialism and the different powers being entangled in a massive world war and the alliances. You had the works of Karl Marx being spread like wildfire. Then you had the Russian Revolution. What you had is in all these kind of coffee houses in these wealthy areas of Europe, they're sitting around in this sort of chattering classes saying, this Marxist guy, he seems to explain the world as it is, and that we have more in common with workers from other countries than we have with our own imperial royal families, and therefore we need to engage in revolutionary fervor to prevent world war and to create a just utopia on earth, right? This was a very much a inner city, people with too much time on their hands kind of issue, right? Now, it was an accident of history that Russia became the first country to become a Bolshevik Stalinist state, right?
Yeah.
And I won't go into the Russian Revolution here, but there is a book. It is one of the best books on history ever written. It is massive. It's by Orlando Figes, called A People's Tragedy. It's like 600 pages, very big pages and very small text. So it's a hard thing to get through, but it is worth it. And that explains it well. But that's who the communists were. Now, because many Jews were kind of wealthy inner city elite types, because they were professionals and doctors and lawyers, a lot of them, right, as well as a lot of other people, became communist, right? But that wasn't because they were Jewish. And this is the thing that people need to kind of, when they get into the discussion, oh, the Jews were communist. No. There is nothing in Judaism or in Zionism or in the the kibbutz or anything like that that suggests that they are communist, right? There is nothing in the Old Testament text. There's nothing in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There is nothing that indicates communism. In fact, the pioneer of kind of proto-communist thinking was probably Sir Thomas More in his book called Utopia in the 16th century, and he was a staunch Catholic, executed for it by Henry VIII for refusing to convert. So this isn't a Jewish ideology. It just happened to be that a certain number of Jews in the places that they were in, along with all the other non-Jews that they associated with, were communists. But because of the anti-Semitism that was rife throughout Europe at the time, it was like, oh, it's the Jews. Well, no, it wasn't the Jews. It was that division was exploited by Germany. Now, there is a census that you can access from the archives of the Soviet Union, which did break down by demographic who was Bolshevik, who was Menshevik in the October Revolution, and about 5.8% of the Communist Party were Jewish. So that gives you an indication. Almost 94%, 94 plus, were not Jewish, which makes perfect sense because vast majority of people are Russian Orthodox. So it basically covered the demographic relative to those areas, right? And a good way to think about it, imagine the United States today. You go, all right, you pick a random person who's Jewish. What's their political leaning? Like, you don't know, right? It depends. Well, there is something that'll help you predict. Where are they living? Are they living in
the red states or the blue states?
yeah, exactly right. So it was a product of, to the extent that there was any disproportionality, it was a product of their wealth and status and their geographic location. It wasn't some Jewish conspiracy. So I really want to lay that out clearly, because some people have kind of made the point that there were Jewish partisans. Now, one of the things, to be fair to that argument, right, and I don't think that people are being anti-Semitic when they raise it. I think they're just misinformed, right? To be fair to that argument, because of the horrible atrocities perpetrated against the Jewish people by the Nazis, the Soviet Union had an incentive to recruit them as partisans when they were fleeing persecution, in order to fight back against the Nazis after the invasion, right? So there was a number of Jewish people that were fighting against the Nazis for obvious reasons. And because the Soviet Union then occupied all of that territory, that as they marched into Berlin for the next 40 years, that kind of created a narrative that, it was the Jewish partisans that betrayed the country. No, they were definitely persecuted first, okay? So...
God, it's a complicated web of motivations.
The way... Okay, so bottom line, the way to think about this issue is that it was a terrible tragedy for Lithuania, right? And for every other country, for Poland, for the Baltic states, because it was a huge loss to your own countries, right? Prior to the Holocaust, very difficult to separate people from like Jew and non-Jew, right? They were all living together. It was all one society. They didn't really make that distinction themselves, particularly in Lithuania, where, as I said in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the History of Lithuania series, they introduced the first laws on religious tolerance. This was during like the 30 Years' War, when religious war was all there was in Europe, right? So, a terrible loss to the life and society of these countries themselves. It's a mistake to think of them as other. Think of them as your right arm cutting off your left, right? It's just not. That's a better conception.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing I would add to that is thank you so much for the comments. Oh man, we're hitting battery, whatever. Thank you so much for the comments on this video. It was really challenging to edit. I basically stopped and started throughout the entire week. Like, it took me a long time to edit the video because I was sitting there reflecting, and I think others have done the same, looking at the comments. They were really meaningful, and I've learnt a fair bit from our community. And also the number of likes is way higher than I thought it would be.
Yeah, we were worried about getting cancelled for this one. We were like,
yeah. And I don't know. I'm so grateful for our audience and for trusting us to talk about such a contentious topic. But on that note, the battery's dying, so we're going to swap cameras.
Oh, wait. I actually did have one other thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And one person did ask about how the Israelis responded. So far, I've only had one comment because I haven't really flogged it with them yet. I wanted to be digested by our main audience first. But one of my Israeli friends has watched it and gave really positive feedback, said basically didn't shy away from the issues and at the same time dealt with them in the way of its proper context, that this is in a positive narrative where things are getting better. And they too were quite positive about where Lithuania is at as well. So I just thought I'd let you guys know that.
Yeah, no. I also did like integrating the heroic stories in that video because I was like, some of them are such a badass.
That's the thing. In the worst moments of humanity, you see the full spectrum of responses. You see the worst of the worst, people exploiting the situation for their own benefit, but you also see people, no matter the deepest adversity, always manage to do the right thing. And you can really tell someone's character in a circumstance like that. So yeah, it's a great privilege to be able to share just a couple of their stories, but there are many more.
Yeah, sure. All right, we're switching cameras. Changing topics. I want to end on something lighthearted. I watched Shang-Chi, the 10 Rings or something on Disney. And my gosh. Okay, it's a new Marvel movie that's come out. And
that's the Asian-focused one, isn't it?
Yes, the Asian-focused one.
Yeah.
And since my whole, your intervention of me watching 90s movies and being cultured, I was like, where have we gotten Disney? It was such a bad movie. And I don't know, I was looking at reviews afterwards and it's been wholly positive for some reason. Like, yes, the action's great, but the main character, the Shang-Chi character, had no arc and it just felt so bland. If you took out the fighting scenes, there's no character development, no great story to be told, like no message, no challenge that you're thinking in your mind. It kind of felt, like a cow town to CCP in some ways. Yeah. I just want to rant about this movie.
All right. Okay. So for people that haven't seen the film and might want to watch it, what's like a 30-second quick just summary so we can get into the discussion?
Sure. So the main character is Shang-Chi. He's like a kung fu master. And the bad guy is his dad.
Yeah.
And essentially they kind of fight it out.
So his dad's like, he's the bad guy. This isn't a spoiler or anything?
No.
Yep.
In the beginning, it clearly shows that the dad has these 10 rings.
Yep.
That goes pew, pew, pew. And like, he's basically like Chinese mafia, obsessed with power. That's in the first 30 seconds of the film. And he's taking over everything. And the son's trying to stop him.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's well, actually, there's a lot in that drama, in that idea. Okay. Sounds like it was poorly executed.
No, yeah, it is.
But there's an interesting, I'll give you a quick jump in with that. That's a really good trope, right? The son and the father at odds with each other. I mean, for those, the best film, one of the greatest films of all time, The Empire Strikes Back, the film one of the films I introduced Charlene to, much to great pride. One of the challenges that George Lucas had, okay, was it's the middle of a trilogy. Everybody knows it's a trilogy. So everybody knows you're not going to kill Luke Skywalker, right? So everyone going into the cinema is like, okay, he's going to survive. So he fights Darth Vader. Everybody knows he's going to survive that fight, right?
Yeah.
So how do you create tension? How do you create drama if you know the main character's got plot armor? Okay, and the George Lucas came up with two major twists. One, the reveal that Darth Vader was his father, one of the greatest reveals in the history of cinema. But also that he could turn to the dark side, that there was actually a lot in Luke that could turn to the dark side. He leaves Yoda without
finishing his training.
Ignores his warnings, goes into a battle before he's ready, is shocked to discover that his own mentors had kept a critical piece of information from him, and was in a position where he was deeply vulnerable and could actually turn to the dark side. And so he turned this moment of like, oh, we don't have to worry about Luke because he's not going to die, to, oh my goodness, I have no idea what's about to happen. So I'm sure this Marvel film was of the same caliber in terms of...
No, he just kind of appears out of nowhere. And you're like, what? And you know what I want to discuss is that they had a lot of opportunity to really show like human nature and suffering. Like, because if your own father, if you know your father's turned evil, like, and you know, there is family tension there, like you'd assume there's some consequence in your own life growing up, right?
Seems reasonable, yeah.
Yeah, it seems reasonable. And like, and there was a clearly like opportunity with the sister throughout the film where the sister, you know, admitted that she felt overshadowed by her brother, her older brother. And I would have thought naturally, yes, like, you know, you could feel neglect, you know, and you want to try to prove to your family members that you are worthy. None of that, like zero. It was kind of like, hi, bruh, punch it out. And then like, oh, I guess you're going to see dad now. Like, and like, that's it. Like, I'm just kind of like, what? Like, Disney, have a bit more respect for your characters. Like, if you want to tell a story. Look, the fight scene on the bus was pretty cool, right? There's a cool bus fight scene. Very well coordinated. But yeah, that was in the first chapter of the movie. But
so you also mentioned that the main character is like a plank of wood, doesn't have any arc. Is that?
Yeah, because like he's like so good looking already. Like in the past, like he has his shirt off, he does like push-ups and like, not even
and that's the end of every story. Get your shirt off and do the push-ups.
Push-ups and work out, and you know he has a best friend, and like he seems so well balanced, happy with life, an ordinary human being. Like he doesn't. You know when you see movies out there that, you know, go through trauma and they're like really struggling in everyday life, you know, because they're still thinking about their trauma. Like family trauma is not a issue at all. You know, I'm saying that for my personal life, just seeing it happen with your own eyes, but it's so unrelatable when it's presented like that on cinema. Like it gives no respect for that. Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, woo, I have superpowers. Like,
well, the reason, and it's a tragedy and an indictment of our society. And in fact, I feel like I've harmed you in a way by introducing you to all these things, because now you watch this stuff and you realize with great lamentation the disaster of our modern life.
I have a critical hat
now. Yes, it's these movies are not made by writers or filmmakers. These movies are made by committees. If you think about
business people,
$200 million US minimum cost of entry for a blockbuster film, right? So you've got Marvel, which is a cinematic franchise at this point, where it's trying to milk the cow as much as possible. And so when you go for your pitch meetings, you say, we're going to have another Marvel film. It's going to be Asia focused for the Chinese market. We're going to have, obviously, some women's empowerment messages for the domestic American market. And they'll just tick all the boxes. And then they'll produce something that...
have a comedic relief and like...
Exactly. It's not... It's the McDonald's of filmmaking. Unfortunately, it's crowded out literally everything else. There isn't diversity in film studios. They're not competing for status anymore. So... You know, Fox was taken over by Disney. Lucasfilm was taken over by Disney. So, yeah, none of these things have any creative merit at this point. And we're in at the end stage of our cultural zeitgeist.
So maybe not in film, but I think there's opportunity just in TV series now.
Hopefully.
Like, yeah. No,
I think, well, the greatest promise exists in film adaptations of successful books. So if we think of Game of Thrones was epic, amazing, until it overran the books. Yeah. And George R.R. Martin wasn't writing fast enough or at all. So he's kind of mostly to blame. Everyone blames Dan and Dave for their lack of creative talent in finishing off the series. But George R.R. Martin deserves most of the blame, because if he had finished the books as he had promised, then those mistakes would not have occurred. They would have followed the books as they had done in the first however many, and it would have been a glorious epic right to the very end. The Witcher, it's got some compromises in terms of it's trying to appeal to different audiences and studios. Like I saw in the first series, it moved away from a couple of themes that made it a bit obvious, but broadly it was good, right? And better than the average kind of series you get. So when people are adapting from source material, people will tend to pick up that material if they love the material. So it's usually created by people that appreciate the source material, which really helps. The second thing is that it gives them cover politically. Like, there are so many scenes in the first episode of Game of Thrones, a 10-year-old boy gets pushed out of a higher story window after walking in on a brother and sister having sex, right? This is, you would not get that just from a normal pitch meeting. You don't go into the normal Disney studio and be like, hey, I've got a TV show for you, right? And yet that series, that episode was just everyone stood up and took notice. They were like, wow, this is amazing. And that's because the writers could say, actually, we're just following the books. It's not our fault. If you want to be angry at someone, be angry at the author.
At the author. Right? You can't blame it. Blame the author.
Yeah. And so that's where cultural hope lies. So if you want to have a cultural influence, become a good writer. Write books, and then 10, 15 years later, you might get a television series. And then you might have a positive impact on cultural life, which is one of the reasons why the book club is focusing on The Witcher, because I think it's a good basis to move on that. The other thing I'd say is...
I want to say, be a good writer and be influenced. And also, if you ever want to write a thesis about the history of Lithuania, you'll have two randoms talk about it.
Absolutely, yeah. There we go. You're going to be excited. The other thing is, it's extraordinary that Disney is still drunk on the Chinese market.
Yeah.
It's clear that this relationship has to end, because first of all,
it's a toxic relationship.
Very much so.
It's not you, it's them. Move on.
Exactly. And Disney's... They've debased their values many times so far. I mean, the Star Wars posters and the Mulan movie thanking the people from Xinjiang province and so on. First of all, it's an embarrassment, but secondly, it's not working. I mean, the Chinese market is not really opening to Disney films. People in China are not buying those tickets in mass numbers. It's basically the Fast and Furious films, and that's it. And then I think about how the West has kind of curtailed itself, but China hasn't. There was a video game called Battlefield 2, many of you will remember, where the US and China are at war, and you would basically be on one side or the other. Now, that was just before the Chinese market became so big that no developer would ignore it, right? And because, of course, it was US versus China, and at that stage, China didn't want to be the enemy of the US. It was kind of banned in China. So no Battlefield movie or Battlefield game, no Call of Duty game or anything like that is focused on China these days. Whereas the number one grossing film in China today of all time is in the Korean War, where the Chinese fought and defeated the Americans in a particular battle. So the Chinese have no qualms about shooting up Americans in their movies. They're ultra blockbuster movies. And I don't understand how Disney's not getting that message, that China doesn't... They don't care about you guys, right? They're looking to replace the United States. So you can continue to go and kowtow before them, and they'll continue just to walk on your prostrated body, because that's the way they see things. And frankly, I mean, I would have contempt for you as well. If I was a superpower and I had this rather pathetic company trying to access my market by prostrating itself before me, and I was like, you're an embarrassment to your own society, you're a traitor to your own people. Yeah, I'll happily exploit you for all of your technical know-how and resources
Yeah.
to build up my own film industry, but
don't
I'm not going to give you any respect. And that's why people like Kantar from the NBA is so admirable, who's actually standing up to all of this, but few and far between.
Yeah, that's true. I think with art, like, they've put up way too many boundaries, right? Like with that, there's so many political boundaries when you want to work in China. And the thing is, what I don't like, right? I don't like is, you can Cowtown and it's very short-sighted. You can make a quick buck, right? But you're giving up all your secrets. And they're just going to replicate it in China and put a Chinese logo on there, owned by the government. So good luck, but like you can make money now, but then you can see like Alibaba and all the big industries that have now suddenly gone. Because, capitalism is bad. It's a shameful.
It reminds me of a quote, and I'll shut up on this after this, but it's a great quote. So when the Vikings invaded Saxon England in the sort of 9th century, they set up a Dane law and got tribute from the other kingdoms not to invade them, right? So they invaded out of fear of the Danes. They kept getting tribute, and one person quipped, if you pay the Dane guild, you'll never get rid of the Dane, i.e., you pay them off for a year, 2 years, but they're still there and they're still going to demand tribute, which is very much China's way. But then someone else quipped, this Dane guild pays for the very weapons that slay you, right? It's telling, right? You go to China, you do business in China. You get some money, but you give them your IP, you give them your property, you give them your know-how. They copy it, they duplicate it, just as Charlene has said. And, you're paying for the very weapons that slay you, right? Disney, its time is numbered because it's actually building up a Chinese industry. I mean, China will, its film industry can create duplicates in India, can create duplicates elsewhere. There'll be other centers of power. Hollywood will not be Hollywood in 25, 30 years' time. It'll be some has-been moment of history. So, just keep that in mind. I mean, this is not in your long-term interest.
Yeah. Okay. I want to say one positive thing about this Shang-Chi movie, and then we can wrap up, is that, yes, it actually focused on, like, Asian Americans. So, like, there was, like, a bit of quirks in the movie, like that Asian culture. So like everyone's sitting around the table and playing Respect the Elders and like no shoes in the house. Like I love that. I'm like, we need more of that. And like in terms of just and it even had one thing about like speaking ABC, which is like Asian Americans not being able to speak Chinese. Like look at this one on the Australian version. So I mean, there were some things that obviously in the corporate business team, they did consult of how to make it more fun for Asian Americans to watch the movie. But that's everything else. All
right. It's a great place to finish.
All right. If you have any questions, any comments, please leave them down below. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Otherwise, stay safe and
ciao for now.